welcome back to the France 24 debate. If you're just joining us, I'm Annette Young. And there was no doubt that it was Barack Obama's night. At the Democratic Convention, the American leader led an emotional assault on Donald Trump. And he was not the only one, with all speakers attacking the Republican candidate, not just as much as a threat to his legacy, but to American democracy as a whole. Of course, all eyes will be on Hillary Clinton later tonight when she takes the stage to accept the nomination as the party's presidential candidate. Now, here to talk to me about the convention is Curtis Young, the former chairman of the Black Caucus in Democrats Abroad in Paris, and from Florida, Stephen Schao, a political strategist and former state director for the Barack Obama campaign in the state. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for joining us. Let me start by you, Curtis. By contrast to the Republican convention, this seems to have been a much slicker event, but how would you sum it up so far?
Positive. It was a convention that represented really, as all the speakers said, what America is, what America stands for, what America's always stood for.
And for you, watching it from Paris, I mean, what were your emotions as you were sort of, particularly watching the American president speak?
It made me again appreciate what a great president Barack Obama has been these past 7+ years. How he will stand in history, his intelligence, his insight, his dignity, probably the most ethical White House in history. Probably not a single scandal. He's a model, and it's very interesting to look at what's happening on the Republican side as a reaction to this great man's presence in the White House these past 8 years.
Stephen, just bringing you in, last night was also a homage to Barack Obama, but as the New York Times wrote, his challenge is to now find a way to acknowledge that the political divides he promised to bridge have only grown deeper and more acrimonious, while arguing persuasively that the way to rise above them is to elect Hillary Clinton. How tough a job is that?
Well, first of all, I think President Obama's singular job last night was to unite and energize the party. He entered his convention in 2008 facing a lot of the same challenges. The Hillary Clinton people were angry, just like the Bernie Sanders people were this year. And just as she did for him, helping him unify the party 8 years ago, his job primarily was to ensure that we were all together. And I think if there's any question last night when he walked off that stage, that's a party united.
Now, the constant theme among all the speakers, Stephen, was to attack Donald Trump. But is it a wise move to base a large part of your campaign on attacking the opposing candidates, especially since the polls are, at this stage, in Trump's favour?
Well, I mean, I think the polls are bouncing all over the place. I mean, this time of year during conventions, they're going to move around a lot. But I do think it's something we need to be careful about. Now, I do think the Hillary Clinton speech tonight will be very forward-leaning. In a lot of ways, it was the job of Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Michelle Obama to lay out the contrast, what's at stake in this election, why it's important for Democrats to be engaged. It's really up to her at this point to kind of close the deal tonight. And I do think it's important because I do think that Donald Trump's entire campaign is to hope that we have a very negative campaign that's very divisive, very cynical, and that drives down voter turnout. A low turnout election in America tends to favor the Republicans. So I do think it's up for her tonight to really make the positive case, and I expect that's what we'll hear out of her.
Curtis, I mean, just following through from that, would it not have been wiser and better perhaps during those speeches to outline more of the policies that a Clinton administration would bring about?
Well, I agree with Stephen in terms of the role of the speakers last night. But in terms of policy, that's Hillary's job. That's Hillary Clinton's job. She's going to do that, and I think she's going to do that very effectively tonight. It's the idea is to remind the voters what's at stake in this election, how serious this election is, how important it is that a Democrat be elected this time. Not that a Democrat be elected, but that Hillary Clinton versus the candidate for the Republican Party.
You spoke there earlier about all of, as you see it, the achievements by the Obama administration. But as I just said, the New York Times talks about the fact that there is a growing divide in American society. And this is not what I imagine Barack Obama wanted his legacy to be.
No, I don't think that we really understood 8 years ago how deep the racial divisions are in America. I think one of the things that happened, we've spoken about this before, is America woke up on November the 9th much surprised that they'd elected Barack Obama to the White House. And there's been a concerted effort, particularly on the part of the Republicans from that date to this date, to delegitimize his presidency, starting with Donald Trump's birther movement. So that kind of animus in the political process has reflected itself in our population, and Trump particularly has taken the lid off of the racial animus that has been laying under the surface since Reconstruction.
And Steve, let me just bring you in at this point too. I mean, the reality is that there is the hollowing out of the middle class, and that's what we're seeing, not just in the States, but across the developed world.
Yeah.
And again, that's feeding into a lot of the political anger, if you like, being expressed by the electorate.
Yeah, this is not new. I mean, if you go back to the turn of the century, from the 19th century to the 20th century, the world was pretty unsettled at that point. And a lot of that was around the fact that we were moving in the developed world from being an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. And I think right now the whole of the world, particularly the developed world, is going through this same change. We're moving away from a world where people could find guaranteed work and in a world that's obviously arguably a lot more opportunity than ever before, but it's a lot more uncertain. And so I suspect that this sort of unsettled politics is going to be around for a little while. Certainly you're seeing it in your country right now. And I don't think we're going to get out of this until we get a little more comfortable with the way that we're all going to make a living for the next generation or two.
But the thing is that it's the mainstream parties who still seem to be struggling with accepting that, and if anything, they're losing voters, particularly the Democrats.
Well, actually, in my little corner of the states, the state of Florida, what's interesting is that both Republicans and Democrats are pretty equally losing voters to minor parties or independents. But what's interesting is they're not losing them because they're seen as getting polarizing. These voters are still voting heavily Democratic or very heavily Republican. They just want a more progressive or conservative agenda. I would also argue the fact that we're more divided. I mean, what's interesting is Barack Obama's approval rating is in the mid-50s in a lot of polls. I mean, as Washington it proves to be dysfunctional, what's interesting is the president's stand is getting better every day with Americans. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's one of the few people that right now is a little bit of a moral authority with voters outside of his own party. Yes,
but if you go to sort of industrial towns in Ohio where there's high unemployment, the places which were traditionally Democrat, that is no longer the case, is it?
Well, I think that's a broad brush. I mean, I think that there are places where the economy, places like where I grew up in a little town in Illinois that largely doesn't exist anymore because the economy doesn't function the way that it did 30 years ago. And places like that, Trump is doing very well. On the flip side, that there's a whole new industries that are developing all around our country in places that with biotechnology and computer science and et cetera, where we're doing very well. So, these things are all about finding the magic coalition to get 50% plus one. But I do think, listen, when we started this convention a few days ago, we were a party obviously divided. The first night was a bit of a disaster. And what you see now is a party I think is united and understand what's important.
Curtis, I would say, though, it is still a divided party, because if you listen to those boos that one heard during Tim Kaine's speech, not everybody there is happy about what's going on. No,
there are people who are a bit unhappy about things that have happened. But at the end of the day, these adults are going to come together. There's no question about it. At the end of the day, these adults are going to come together. The Democratic Party is always ends up as a united party. There's just too much at stake. Change is difficult. Whether you are supporting a candidate that doesn't win, or if you look at America in a certain way, as Steve says, the industrial America has gone away. There's a new kind of an economy. People who are attached to the old economy are not very happy because they've seen their lives change. So we're in this kind of a transition. That kind of transition is reflected in the party conventions as well.
And it's certainly reflected in the fact that someone like Bernie Sanders got as far as he did. I understand that you were, or still are, a supporter of Bernie Sanders.
I'm a supporter of Bernie Sanders. I'm a supporter of a much more progressive agenda for the Democratic Party. And I'm very happy to see, as I listen to Bernie Sanders speak, and as I've read, I'm very happy to see many of his ideas in terms of minimum wage, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, and these kinds of things have been folded into the Democratic Party platform.
Steve, at this point, can I also ask you, you're saying now the party is united. Some would probably dispute that. There clearly is some unease among those who would vote Democrat voting for Clinton, since for them, and I'm thinking particularly of younger people, she represents the political establishment that they very much oppose.
Yeah, but I don't know that we're ever going to get 100%. I mean, the only thing that we can go on is the empirical data that's out there. As you mentioned earlier, I ran President Obama's campaigns in Florida, and I became the state director on the day the Democratic primary ended in 2008. Talk about a divided party at the time. Our own polling showed 25% of Democrats were going to vote for John McCain. Right now you're seeing most polls in my state and other battleground states, no more than 10 or 11% of Democrats are talking about voting for Trump. And so in a lot of ways, we are a lot more united than we were 8 years ago at this time. I just think it's louder. I mean, first of all, you got things like Twitter and Facebook, which make it easier for people to be loud. And you go to a convention, if 20 people in the back of the room scream, you're going to hear about it. But again, if you look at almost every piece of polling that's out there, we are a lot more united at this point than we were 8 years ago. Tell
me, from where you stand, how is the convention looking to you, and is it helping to boost Clinton's popularity?
Absolutely. I mean, what's interesting, so last night, being an old Obama staffer, when he speaks in things like this or the State of the Union, you tend to get a lot of text messages and emails from your colleagues who are all very excited. And the thing that I saw last night that I had not seen before among a lot of people, and again, understand, I started this campaign as a guy wanting Joe Biden for president. I was probably the loudest voice in our country encouraging the vice president to run. I did like 150 TV appearances in 10 weeks. And obviously, like a lot of folks, I was disappointed. But what I saw last night on my email, my Twitter, my Facebook, were Democrats saying, how do I get involved? How do I help? Where do I sign up? And that was a level of energy that didn't even exist on Monday of this week.
Do you think that Donald Trump, as a result, is a unifying force in the party?
I have no question. I think that Donald Trump is the best thing that can happen to Democrats in this cycle. There's no doubt. Because the contrast is so absolutely clear. I mean, if you were to take a Marco Rubio or a Jeb Bush or a John Kasich, I think we'd have a tough election. But with Trump, it really is sort of basically, where do you stand? Are you for who we are as a country, a melting pot or not? And if you are, you can't be for him. So it's a pretty simple contrast.
Curtis, is Hillary Clinton capable of bridging the divide? Because it's not going to disappear. And, as we mentioned earlier, it's not just an economic divide, but also a race divide too.
I think Hillary Clinton is absolutely capable of bridging this divide and bringing the Democratic Party together. You have to realize how long Hillary Clinton has been in the public eye and how much opposition she's had since the moment she made that statement of not there to bake cookies. From that moment to this moment, they've thrown mud at her in every possible way, and Hillary Clinton has maintained her stature, her dignity, her poise, and her conviction, and her conviction is very clearly that we are a country that's united. We're going to come together, and that we're going to make progress. Because as many of the speakers said, what's at stake over these next 4 or 8 years are our children.
Steve, there's also a dramatic shift, perhaps even a reversal of the roles that these two major parties have been identified with for several decades. And for the first time, we're seeing, perhaps since Vietnam, the Democratic Party now being the party of national security expertise, with certainly Clinton very much viewed to be on the right of the Democrats, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, no, I think she's an almost unavowed hawk. It's interesting. Most of my Republican friends who worked in the Bush White House in national security, they are much more comfortable with the idea of her being near the nuclear codes than Donald Trump. And I think she firmly believes that America cannot protect its interests by folding back into itself. And Trump offers a very isolationist view of the world. It is sort of fascinating whether it's things like foreign policy or some level of trade. You're seeing my party take on the mantle of projecting itself outward, while Trump again is sort of this America first. I'm not really sure what that really means, but this idea that we can somehow succeed by retrenching, which I just disagree with completely.
How do you think that plays though with the younger voter, the millennial?
Well, I don't think that you can sort of say that voters homogeneous. I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who are young who are tired of war, which I understand. I have friends that have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are a lot of folks that are tired of war. At the same time, millennials are more worldly than any generation we've had, thanks to the internet. So, and are more accepting of different cultures. It's millennials that drove change on things like gay marriage. It's millennials that are pushing back on things like immigration reform. I mean, on these anti-immigration stuff and the anti-Muslim rhetoric, because again, they view the world differently. So, I don't think it's as simple as saying one or the other.
Curtis, just a final word from you. Do you think, I mean, you're clearly going to be voting for Hillary Clinton, but will you do that with a heavy heart?
That's a difficult question. No, I will vote for Hillary Clinton because I can't. The idea of Donald Trump in the White House is absolutely not possible. At the same time, I wish that she wasn't as much of a hawk as she is. I wish that she was more progressive. That worries me a little bit in terms of these wars that keep unfolding. But given that, at the end of 4 years, because one of the greatest things that happened in our democracy was the first president, George Washington, who had a possibility to be the emperor, to be whatever he decided to do. At the end of 4 years, he did something phenomenal. He packed up his bags and he went home. There was a change in government. I'm not so sure if this guy ends up in the White House, I'm not so sure how willing he would be to do that at the end of 4 years. So anybody in the White House but Donald Trump.
On that point, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank both my guests, both Steve Charles and Curtis Young. And that's it for the France 24 debate. We'll be back with more news and headlines after a very short break. Do stay with us here on France 24.